Welcome to Healing with Nature, the mental health benefits of the Arroyo Seco. On this program, we'll be exploring the vital connection between mental health and the great outdoors. From the restorative power of fresh air and sunshine, to the calming effect of scenic landscapes, we'll delve into the many ways in which spending time in nature can lead to happier, healthier minds. And right here in Pasadena, we have a treasured natural asset, the Arroyo Seco, our protected parkland and open space with 22 miles of trails and a plethora of recreational activities. Today's guests include Pasadena's Mayor Victor Gordo and Dr. Paula Verrette, former Chief Medical Officer at Huntington Hospital and current One Arroyo Foundation board member. Thank you so much for joining me today. So Paula, we'll start with you. So your background as Chief Medical Officer at Huntington Hospital and as a pediatrician put you in a unique position to discuss our topic today. Tell us about your involvement recognizing and managing mental health conditions in children.
Well, first, fundamental at our core, all pediatricians are child advocates. And as a child advocate, when the data begin to emerge about the impact of certain adverse events on a child's life and this long-term impact on them into adulthood, it really was a call to change, to do something, to respond. Just to review that data for a little bit, Kaiser did a study. They have a longitudinal study of children all the way through adulthood, and they were able to successfully demonstrate that those children who had adverse events like food or housing insecurity, violence, witnessing, assaults of their parents, alcoholism, drugs, and those type of things, they had in adulthood a higher likelihood that they too would have mental health issues, and they would depression, alcoholism, and drug use. Those were the ones that we thought, but we were also surprised to find that they also had physical health issues, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, obesity. So it became clear that all of these adverse effects had an effect on both physical and mental health. And they all had one common denominator, stress. And that's when we recognized the impact of toxic stress and made a decision that we need to both educate and try and alleviate toxic stress in children.
Victor, since you were first elected as Pasadena's mayor, you've been very open about your interest in mental health in Pasadena. Was there a particular experience that raised this concern for you?
Well, I couldn't say it any better, Doctor, than you've stated it. My personal experience being moved from one part of the world to another, watching, people around me experience trauma, loss of parents, grandparents, all of those things, living in disadvantaged conditions. I mean, you just see the impacts that it has on people. It's not just medically that people are affected, but they're affected psychologically, and their ability to move forward in life is impacted. And so I watched in my own family people struggling with mental health disorder, and then I watched my friends, and I in my attempt to bring them to help, and it's very difficult.
So Paula, there are stress points that everyone confronts, but especially our youth, that can trigger mental health issues. What are some of these stress points, and have they changed over time? And if so, how?
Well, the adverse events that I talked about previously, for sure, but our biggest stress point was COVID. COVID was such a disruptor. I mean, it separated families, economic impact in terms of people lost jobs. People were housed in those people who were living in apartments, multiple families in one room or several rooms in terms of that. School disruption for kids, we know that remote learning was not there. In fact, it stressed every fabric of our existence during that period of time. And we'll be studying the impact of that for years to come.
Suddenly we couldn't go outside, and suddenly we were all indoors with our families, and I think a lot of people had to face the reality that we were struggling that people within our own families were struggling, but also people in our community. I think you may have been on the producer and director when we interviewed some of the kids at Madison Elementary. And here we see a young child in our community participating in a classroom remotely, but they have a cardboard desk in a closet as a means of trying to bring some sense of privacy, some sense of a learning environment, because the rest of the family was also in there. In that one bedroom apartment. And, that was tough to watch, but it reminded us that people are and were struggling. I think COVID surfaced a lot of these struggles.
One of the things I definitely noticed is I was surprised where I thought, oh, I'm doing okay. We're hanging in there. And I would definitely have an emotional response out of nowhere. And I would wonder what was happening. I was like, well, no, it's trauma that everyone is experiencing right now. And so saying that, Paula, what should an adult, parent, teacher, or friend look for when identifying stress points?
Well, I think the stress points when they identify the reaction of the child, emotional outbreak, anger, hostility, sleep disturbances, those type of things point to it. Actually, children and adults react pretty much the same in terms of that. And then the idea is for those things that you can get a handle on to alleviate, but there might be some things that you can't. I mean, there's some things like, for example, parents could be struggling with not only taking care of their family, but taking care of their parents. And that is not going to be relieved anytime soon. And so then at that point you say, well, what can I do to make it better? And there are several different things that can do it. Yoga, for example, for some people, deep breathing exercises. A friend of mine, a psychologist, did this tool for the school district where she filled up an empty jar of baby food with glycerin and put glitter in it. And you would shake it and take deep breaths until the glitter settled. But the biggest thing that's accessible, or should be accessible to everyone, is just exercise in a green space. Just to be outside in nature. And I think that does wonders. And actually, as a family, that's something that a family can do together. And everyone in the family could benefit from that.
And building those habits when you're young, those transfer into your adult life and really sustain you when you're going through a hard time. Mm-hmm. So Victor, the city in partnership with the county is making a major investment in the former Kaiser Permanente site on North Lake. How did this partnership begin?
Well, the partnership began, and we're developing this partnership, but the concept started because of my own experience attempting to help my family and friends, discovering that when someone is in need of mental health services, well, there aren't very many mental health services in Pasadena that can be easily accessed. You have to go clear across the county to the east to access those services, notwithstanding that the county spends $55 million a year right here in the general Pasadena area. But I challenge anyone to identify where you can access those services, particularly outpatient services. It's very difficult to do, and someone struggling in crisis, can't wait for 3 weeks for an appointment to see someone. They need services now. And then when you look at substance use disorder, then you have to go clear across to another part of the county to access those services. And then you discover that the mental health services are provided by the Department of Mental Health, while substance disorder services are provided by health services. And so you have to wind your way through two different bureaucracies to try and access those services. And that becomes very difficult, particularly for someone who's struggling. Here as mayor, I'm trying to help a friend of mine, and I was struggling. With the help of the supervisor's office, I was struggling to find services for my own friends. And that shouldn't happen. And you shouldn't try and access services through silos, because that's not how we live our lives. Because of our experience, traumatic and successful, experiences in life, we react in a certain way to the challenges that face us. And the way we provide services should do the same. They should treat people individually and not as though we live our lives in silos. And so I approached Supervisor Barger and said, you know, we have an opportunity here. There's an empty property at the former Kaiser Clinic. Let's see if we can bridge this divide. Let's see if we can bring Department of Mental Health services and health services for substance disorder, particularly for those who present dual diagnoses and are struggling with both mental health and substance disorder. Let's see if we can provide services at one place. And, you know, and the data that we now see shows that 78% of the people who we see out on the street, who we would deem to be homeless, are struggling with the underlying issues of mental health and or dual diagnosis, mental health and substance disorder. And we need to treat those root causes and not just pretend that bringing more bricks and mortar and placing people in homes, although very important, and we should continue that work, but that's not the only way to help people. We need to treat them comprehensively.
And having to go to multiple places, that might be just enough of a barrier that it stops someone from getting the assistance they need.
It absolutely, for my friend, childhood friend, who I was assisting and trying to help, you know, it was very painful to see him out on the street. And I would take him to a clinic in Los Angeles for health services, and I'd take him to Pomona for mental health services, and get him back on track. And we'd find him housing here in Pasadena or Altadena. And then he was handed a bus pass and told, you know, for your services, go to this part of the county for mental health, and for health services, go to another part of the county. And he was expected to find his way. And he was expected also to stay on top of his appointments and his prescriptions. Well, it just didn't work. Pretty soon, I'd see him on the street again. And I'd say, you know, what happened? Mm-hmm. And come to find out, well, he missed an appointment or two, didn't keep up with his prescriptions.
Sometimes that's all it takes.
And that's all it took.
Thank you, Victor.
And it was a revolving door.
So, Paula, you've mentioned studies that have found that getting into nature and away from phones, computers, and the media can offer relief to those experiencing stress. How did these studies reach that conclusion?
Well, there are several studies. I think the ones that are most developed are actually in Japan. Japan has rated each one of their parks and as by its ability to reduce stress and reduce hypertension and things like that. It's been well documented. Those studies are hard to do to see the impact, but the translation from Japan is called forest bathing. Mm-hmm. And when I say that, I get the particular response. It's not running naked and taking a bath in the forest. It's about submerging yourself or surrounding yourself in terms of greenery and the positive impact on nature. And the fact that every person, every human has that connection on little and small ways. I mean, even in terms of kids, if a kid plants a garden and grows a vegetable, they'll eat a vegetable. And so we have this connection with nature. And in Pasadena, we are fortunate that we have such a tree canopy. We have enormous tree canopy. If you look out at the background here. And one thing is we have to preserve that. I have a concern, and maybe the mayor might have a similar one, that as we go to more dense housing, we really don't want to create living environments that separate people too far away from green space. Yeah, and we have to keep in mind about that. In New York City, to be honest with you, they recognize the importance of this so much so that they're starting what they call pocket forests. Mm-hmm. They're actually taking a piece of land, maybe 8-10 feet wide, and planting trees to try and get back a canopy, because the city really outside of Central Park does not have one.
It's so important. So,
Yes.
And in your professional opinion, But these same principles apply to the mental health of adults and is getting away a good stress relief for everyone. I mean, speaking of, I was just in the Redwoods and it was the most magnificent time. And I definitely felt that, so.
That's right. Yes, it is equally effective for both children and adults. I think what children need green space for play. And play is important for kids on a number of different levels. But the other thing you have to realize too, children's brains are not all developed. The frontal lobe is not developed until much later on in life. So their ability to cope and manage, because your frontal lobe has most of your identity, it has your modifying ability. The lower parts of your brain are just your more primitive responses, your fight or flight responses. So for children, the access to green space and having socialization, interactive play, and exercise, that is very relieving to them for any kind of stressors. And unfortunately, some green space might exist, but it may not be safe. And so I think when we talk about how do we have a healthy city, I mean, there are many, many components to that in terms of services and things like that, in terms of parks and keeping up our parks and areas. But we want to make sure safe green space is accessible to everyone in Pasadena.
So Victor, speaking of the outdoors and park space, you spent some of your childhood here in the Arroyo Seco working at the Rose Bowl.
Absolutely.
Could you tell me how that impacted your life as a youth and how does it affect you today as a city leader?
Well, it had a tremendous impact for all the reasons that you described, Doctor. I think we have to keep in mind that it's the role of a city to recognize that it's not just services, but it's the environment in which we live our lives that make a tremendous impact. And for me, the Arroyo Seco and the Rose Bowl had a tremendous impact on both counts. It was a place for my friends and I to go and explore and wander around. We spent a lot of times in the mountains, on the trails, just wandering around. Little did we know that we were also working on our mental health. And although I'm not sure my parents would agree with that, but the Arroyo also provided for me a job opportunity at the Rose Bowl. As a kid, I sold stuffed footballs at the Rose Bowl. And that made a tremendous impact on me to see our city at work, putting on great events, but at the same time being very respectful of the environment in which it provided these great events and hosted the world. And so that shaped my view of what Pasadena should be. Yes, we should be a great center. Yes, we should be a place that people want to live, work, and play and visit. But we have to keep in mind that it's not just the built environment at the stadium that they want to visit. It's the setting that really makes it ideal. And so I've always worked to try and keep to that history.
So you speak about a comprehensive plan for mental health services. How does One Arroyo and their work create a positive health experience for people in the Arroyo?
Well, it's one thing to find ways to help people clinically and medically. And we've talked a little bit about that, about the need to, particularly for the dual diagnosis community, to provide services in one place and to make those clinical and outpatient services available to people in our community. But then you have to also have an opportunity for people to experience nature and life in a positive physical surrounding. And that's what One Arroyo's goal is to protect this beautiful place that we know provides enjoyment, provides experience, an outdoor experience for individuals, and provides a natural beauty. And so I think as we think about mental health and we think about physical health, it's important to do both, to ensure that we're providing the clinical and services that people need, the medical services that people need, as we also focus on the environment that we're all living in, also as a way to bring enjoyment and health and health opportunities for people.
So Paula, how does this relate to your work with One Arroyo? How can what One Arroyo is doing assist the city's goal of offering our community a comprehensive mental health system?
I think we have always done and thrived in Pasadena when we have public partnerships, private partnerships. We have a number of different philanthropies that support it. For me, One Arroyo, to be honest, I was first brought into this, although I used the Arroyo myself and hiked the trails, by Bill Bogart, who is our own treasure, you know. And he approached me and he says, "Are you aware?" And I think that's one of the reasons why we're trying to get more public here, because a lot of people are not even aware that we exist or what the ambition is. But when you look at the Arroyo, we want it to be preserved, restored for generations to come. We treasure it, and we have certain gems that we find that have been maybe fallen a little bit in repair and needs to have improvement. And I think when you do those type of things, you make it more enticing and accessible for the community. I think when you talk about mental health, it's a broad topic, but it's your emotional, social, and psychological health. And we know that these things promote those type of things, the spaces. What we want to do is make it easy for people to use, because you can go treatment, which is really important. You want to do the preventative end too as well. In a holistic approach, you want the preventative side for both health and physical health and mental health, as well as the treatment side for the same.
Any final thoughts?
I want to applaud One Arroyo for taking on the challenge of preserving and curating what I consider to be one of the most important public spaces, not just in Pasadena. It's clear that we are very fortunate, but I'd like to challenge people to think in their mind's eye, what other space like the Arroyo exists in our region, in Southern California? They're few and far between, and I would say to you, it makes us very unique. And so the fact that One Arroyo has taken on the challenge of preserving, curating, and ensuring that this great space is available for generations to come, not just for Pasadenans, but for the well-being and health of our neighbors as well, is very important, should be applauded and importantly supported.
Thank you. Paula, any final thoughts that you have?
I agree with everything the mayor has said. And I want to add is that there is a certain attractiveness of Pasadena. And because it's an attractive environment, the people who end up coming and living here are very much, they're generous, they're engaging, and that the people we have, if we mobilize all of the people, and I do believe there's kind of a brain trust that we don't often, and maybe don't tap in as much. I think when you look around, there's a number of professionals that may be retired or towards the end of their career, looking for opportunities to contribute to the city that we live in. And I think the more we tap into those brain trusts, and the more that we agree and have one vision, I think it's a key to our success.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to thank you both so much for joining me today out in this beautiful location. And for those of you watching at home, thank you for joining us for this program. And I strongly encourage you to go out and enjoy the outdoors. Good night.
For more information on the One Arroyo Foundation, please visit onearroyo.org.